Hope you'll got a glass of water if you need one. Kia ora and welcome to Merging to Main. This week, we're going to talk about why community engagement matters and why it's important. We have apologies from one of our panelists, Matt, who is running a little bit behind time and having trouble connecting. He will hopefully pop in the conversation as we go. And while we expect him to turn up, if he doesn't, we might have to catch him at a later date. In the meantime, we have thankfully the huge privilege of being joined by both Tia and Jay. They're both part of doing engagement in a way that is different to how a lot of us who are in tech roles may think about engagement, which can often be going to a trade show or a convention. And I'd love to be able to highlight them, what they do, and we'll talk about the lessons we can learn from their experience as it applies to us as engineers, as business owners, as managers, and as the magical people who control the marketing budget. So with that being said, I'll pass over to Tia to introduce herself, and we'll talk a little bit about the work that she's doing, and then she can pass to Jay to do the same. So Tia,
thank you.
welcome.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you very much for inviting me to be a part of this fascinating conversation. As you said, my name is Tia Lush. I am the founder and a board trustee of a registered charity here in New Zealand. So our charity is called STEM Wana Trust, and our purpose and our mission is to inspire families through interactive events such as large-scale festivals, outreach initiatives, and collaborations. And our strength in what we do is in bringing together community, education, and the industry. So that's a little bit about me, and I'll hand over to Jay to introduce himself. Kia ora, Jay.
Kia ora, Tia. Thanks for that. And kia ora, Paul, and everyone else for joining us today. Likewise, awesome opportunity to be here. Really stoked. He uri ahau ngō Ngāti Apa me Ngāti Tūwharetoa, hoku iwi, ngō whanganui ahau ko Jay Tihema tōku ingoa. My name's Jay. I belong to Ngāti Apa and Ngāti Tūwharetoa tribes here in New Zealand. Got a couple of hats on today. My role, my primary role is operations manager with Toi Kairawa, which is a Māori economic development agency based in the Bay of Plenty. We work across the region with sort of like Tia, with a lot of education providers, community organizations, local industry to try and elevate the prosperity and well-being for our people through various sort of events and initiatives, whether it be through opening up the doors to STEAM and a lot of the pathways and development opportunities that are available in that sort of space. And a lot of that and with a partnership approach to how we do that with the community. And to date, a lot of my work with ii.nz, which is a small open source company which contributes heavily to open source projects under CNCF like Kubernetes. A lot of that work has also been around engaging with schools and promoting open source and some of the technical and interpersonal skill sets to help promote career pathways in those sorts of spaces too. So yeah, looking forward to getting into it more. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Great to have you both here. All right, so diving into a little bit to expand on what you've both said. Tia, talking about engaging families. What sort of age groups do you tend to get the most engagement from? And what are you engaging them with? Like, what sort of things are they learning or experiencing in the events you're putting on?
Sure. So as we are probably all aware, it's now widely acknowledged that if children don't experience that spark of STEM by the time they are 8 years old, then it's actually unlikely that they will ever even pursue a STEM subject or career. So for us as a charity, what we're doing is actually hitting that young age group. So actually, we want to engage with children from the ages of 3 onwards. You know, as soon as they're able to walk and communicate, we want them to be hands-on and to be learning and doing STEM. So what we do is very much based on approaching that family engagement. We want the whole family unit involved because ultimately, you know, that is their support system for that child, whatever age they are. They're going to need the support of their parents, their influencers, you know, their grandparents, their aunties, uncles, their peers, their teachers. And so it's all about how can we not just engage that child, but actually engage with the whole family unit and support system that surrounds them. So what we do very much is geared towards that younger age, where things like hands-on learning, where we're actually allowing them to break things and make things, is really important. So that's the age that works really well with us. And we're hoping that the work we do will then allow Jay and people like Matt and Jay to do the continuing, like handing on the baton, almost like a relay race. We're handing on what we've started and hopefully created at that grassroots spark level, and then handing it over to the amazing work that Jay and Matt are doing once they're a little bit older.
Great. I'm circling back to the point there. You mentioned about the importance of being exposed to STEM topics, so like engineering and programming, robotics, before the age of 8.
Yes, absolutely. Now, we know, Paul, that if you put a robot in front of a child, whatever their age, they're engaged already. So
Absolutely.
That's not the issue. You know, that engagement is going to happen naturally because children are curious, and they actually really want to learn, especially around that young age. So we need to encourage that, but without the support of their whānau, we call it in New Zealand, their community and their influencers, that's going to be a little bit harder for them to continue to pursue. So absolutely, let's get them making slime and learning about chemistry at age of 3. You know, let's get them building Lego blocks and building structures and learning about engineering and structures. So there's ways that we can engage with these young ages with really simple but relevant activities. And most of it we already do with them. It's just allowing them to understand, and they're learning by stealth, I like to say. You know, when they're making slime and when they're baking, they're actually learning about different ingredients, about chemistry, about how that all reacts with each other. So it's just allowing them to understand what they're doing and how that relates to the wider world and what the opportunities are if they continue to be curious.
So I can see, because I've read some of the research as well, but I get you to speak to it as an expert in the area, that if they don't have that engagement or engage that curious, how do I break things, how do I make things part of their brain as children, it makes the work that happens for high schoolers and adults that Jay and Matt are involved in much harder, because then they're not interested in going into those fields.
Absolutely.
I don't know, I've seen that quite a bit looking at different ages. And the importance, just talking to our audience for a minute, is for those of us who are involved in trying to hire or find engineers, that if we drop the baton with the generation that's coming up now and we don't engage them in why our work is interesting and why they should learn it, we're only going to be left with AI chatbots in 10 years, and we know how bad those are. As how that's part of the process works, Jay, can I pick on you to talk about what it's like working with high schoolers and working with people who are, again, more diverse groups who need additional or different pathways to come into STEM?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, a lot of our focus is working at the high school level and from the beginning of the high school level as well. So as Tia said, engaging early is really critical. Quite typically, industry tends to look on those who are sort of year 11 to year 13, sort of between the ages of 15 to 18, to sort of emphasize it, and more the sort of latter part of that in terms of where they start identifying potential talent. But that early engagement is really critical. And a lot of times, by the time they're hitting, that point where they're ready to leave school, some of them have already made up their minds or been influenced to make up their minds, or perhaps still haven't had sufficient support and engagement to help make informed decisions about what their options are. So there's all this sort of pressure to just jump into something, get into a qualification, get into a trade or something, and make a huge commitment without having all that sort of lead up time investment to help cultivate their skills and curiosity first. So we try to engage with the younger ages in the high school bracket just as much as the older ones, and let them know that at any sort of ages they can start considering what their future could look like. Same sort of deal as far as exposure and interactive engagement ideally. Not just the things that we do, we have a bit more limited capacity in terms of some of the programs and things that we deliver directly. So big part of our work as well is also working in collaboration and partnership with those like Tia or other program providers who specialize and have the expertise in those sorts of areas. This is how you can have a bit of a play with what engineering can look like, or as Tia sort of mentioned, put something together, break it, put it back together, and have a bit more experiential sort of introduction to those sorts of things as well. And then as far as working with other sorts of communities, I mean, we work in groups, work with some of the neurodiverse kids who unfortunately go overlooked far too often in terms of the value and the potential that they carry. Obviously, a lot with Māori communities. We work alongside our Pacifica communities, and each one of those groups that we engage with. I mean, it's really critical that we don't approach them with a one-size-fits-all approach either. Everyone has their their own values and attributes, learning styles and things that we need to be mindful of and aim to adapt to too. So it keeps us on our toes. And we also engage a lot from the sort of primary elementary levels too. Not to as much to the degree as what Tia does, but again, it's really important to for everyone to be thinking about that a lot younger. I mean, if the first 1,000 days of a child's life is that critical in their cognitive development, it makes sense that more you're putting these sorts of tools and engagement opportunities in front of them to help grow that organically over time is key. And we work alongside and have connected some as young as 5 or 6 with local industry to work on. I mean, recently we did a water monitoring project, and industry themselves were just blown away with how much these kids are actually absorbing and feeding back, and owning their projects and things too. So yeah, it's
brilliant. So
awesome.
coming from your work with ii, talking about exposing people, like what sort of technical level are you getting even high schoolers involved in? We've got Laurent in the chat asking about, are you training 3-year-olds in Kubernetes? Like, what age do you introduce that sort of technology with, and when do they engage? When does it work well?
Yeah, it's been an interesting journey. I don't have a tech background myself, so I wasn't even introduced to Kubernetes till about 2 years ago, or even open source 2.5 years ago. So, when I start talking about data orchestration management and all those sorts of things, it was a whole new sort of vocab, and much the same for a lot of the schools and those we sort of connect with on a daily as well. So we start getting to things like clusters and APIs and all that sort of stuff. The majority of kids that we sort of engage with, that's a little bit beyond their skill level. But if you're starting to, we've tried to sort of approach it from a few different angles. Even it was just sort of like, Pokemon Go and Spotify and things right on that, and introducing some ideas around self-replication and all those sorts of things. But I mean, there are some as young as sort of 14 or 15 who already do that, and they play Raspberry Pis, and they have their own sort of curiosity, and they're doing those sorts of things in their own sorts of bedrooms. It's just not they're not made accessible or where in the formal education spaces. So in some cases, some of our team have just done a bit of one-to-one mentoring with some of those kids, and gradually introduced little mini projects and things to see how they go. And we just try to be a little bit of adaptive in terms of how quickly they can grasp that information. Others we've been able to sort of send away with sort of bigger sort of mini projects and bodies of work that they can come with over time and keep sort of spending time. So it's just sort of it's still an ongoing sort of journey to figure out
very adaptable depending on the person, right? So what I'm hearing is some high schoolers pick up some stuff really fast. You've got 14, 15-year-olds who are working with Kubernetes or working with Raspberry Pis and Linux. Others not so much. But you're fostering the interest, and so that when they come to the end of high school age, looking at careers and learning pathways, then they know that things like Kubernetes exist, and that Linux exists, and that these DevOps pathways are actually a valid option. Because what I know from colleagues who have also in my part of the world in APAC, often we don't end up encountering these tools until adulthood. And for those who might get, go down the pathway of doing desktop support and get into IT that way, may never be aware of the whole ecosystem, which now we're trying to hire for and we can't find the people with. So the work around exposing high schoolers to these technologies is incredibly important because we want those people to not go on a 10-year pathway to doing desktop support, but to hopefully come into the open source community and Kubernetes and DevOps and SRE roles so that we can fill a bit of a talent gap that exists in APAC. No, talking as someone who's recently had to hire, in the US, there's a lot of talent, but away from the US, it's difficult for APAC and Europe to find a lot of people who have these skills. So the idea that we should be engaging high schoolers is something I think that a lot of us who are in the international space need to be considering when we look at other parts of the world. If we're seeing hiring problems, there's something happening earlier on that we could engage with and we could do better. But the other part of what Jay said I really want to pick on him again to talk a bit more about, what does it look like if you're trying to customize what you're doing? Well, in Tia's case, which I also would love her to answer to, how do you put on events if you're targeting children when you don't know how they think? Or hey, how do you put on events or create programs for high schoolers or for iwi when you're not necessarily coming from that background? For those who are in different countries, how would they support work or design work internationally to contribute back to the community in a way that's likely to be successful? So I'd love to hear each of your thoughts on that. If I'm sitting in a different country and I'm saying, oh, here's a whole part of the world I'm having trouble hiring in, what does success look like? How do I figure out what to do?
Yeah, I mean, for us, I guess one of the key things is we never assume we know better. We'd never try to go in there and say, look, this is a solution and this is what you guys need and this is what it's supposed to look like. We're very conscious of trying to approach things with a partnership approach, and we want to go in there to listen before we speak. This might be an opportunity, with our resources, with our connections, with the kind of work that we do that might benefit, your community, your iwi, your kura. But I mean, a school from, there might be one area could be completely different for another school that's another kilometer or two up the road, right? So it's a lot about taking that time to try and understand, who it is that we're trying to engage with first, and their people know their people. So you let us know what you think is priority, and we will adapt and work together to co-design what a response could look like. All too often, the opposite is true. There's a lot of people who go into communities, even if they're well-intentioned, but it's sort of, I'll show up and, here's a bunch of computers. We don't know if you're going to need them or have the capacity to be able to use them, but, we've got some stuff we can donate. We're going to run a program or events or anything. It's, you're not going to be involved or have a lot of feed-in or oversight to what that sort of looks like. And then, they're surprised as to why it hasn't had the engagement or involvement that they're otherwise hoping for. So we always want to be really respectful and mindful that if we're doing something in service to people, that that they are kept at the center at every stage of that process.
It makes sense. So you've found even on a school level that you've got to partner with people who are there and change what you're doing and how you're doing it depending on the people who are already there. There's more success in partnering rather than just delivering the same approach over and over again.
100%. Even with individuals in the school, there's some people who are really proactive and get it with STEAM and STEM. They're like, yes, absolutely, we want to make this available. What do I need to do? Whereas some people, even in their own sort of departments, aren't that open and and want to embrace it the same sort of way, a little bit more reluctant to make that opportunity available to their students. And a lot of times could be because they're already time and resource for themselves, and it's just additional workload to work through those sorts of things. But that's why, again, it's so important that we're flexible and adaptable and working alongside them as possible to make sure that it's hitting those marks.
Makes sense. And Tia, did you find similar? You're doing a whole lot of STEM work in schools, and I know you've also been involved in STEM overseas. what's your experience been like trying to take success from a different country and share it around the place?
Absolutely. So what Jay just said there really resonated with me, that whole co-design piece about actually, if we are providing service to the community, what does the community want? So we need to ask that question first of all. So my example was when I came over from the UK. So I've been in New Zealand for nearly 6 years now, and time's gone by very quickly. So when I was in the UK, I founded and helped to organize the STEM Festival in Peterborough. And so I had that experience about how to rally people, how to organize a big scale event. And so when I came to New Zealand, there was an opportunity to do something similar. But what I did first of all was I recognized that I was in a very different space culturally, as well as physically, climate-wise. And so the first thing I had to do was actually talk to people and ask them, firstly, what was available in this space already? Was there something that was already existing that I could plug into and support and help? If there was a gap, what did that gap look like? And how did that fit within the existing ecosystem of what was happening? So the first couple of months for me was just meeting people and chatting to people and understanding the needs, the requirements, and what that looked like. So it would have been really easy, as Jay said, to sort of, plug in and play again and go, oh, I'm here, I'm Tia, I've got a festival, this is what we're going to do, come along. But that would not have worked. And so it was really important for us as a community, and for me as to sort of connect with existing leaders in the community or voices and people of influence to support what it was that we were trying to do. So it was very much a collaborative piece and pulling on the strength of what was already there and not trying to recreate or build, but actually emphasizing and just allowing people to do the work they already did, but under a sort of a bigger viewpoint. So that's really how we were able to make the first STEM festival back in 2019 the success it was. No one knew what STEM was at that point. Even educators, sadly, when we spoke to them, they were like, oh, what does STEM stand for? So first of all, it was that, right, okay, how do we help support and teach the teachers to allow them to have that confidence, first of all. And then it was an education piece to communicate with the community on what it looked like. So very much about listening and then designing it, the activity, the activation, whatever it is, the festival itself, around what was needed at a very almost local level to some extent.
Makes sense. So I've learned from both of you a lot is the importance of listening, of finding leaders, of doing partnership. And these are the things that make these events and engagement far more likely to be successful. It sounds like, Jay, you've seen examples of people just throwing laptops at a school or tried to do a program and it's failed. And Tia, I'm sure you've seen similar things where the copy and paste approach doesn't work, because that's how we learn about the importance of the partnership and the listening. So if you were advising colleagues of mine from big companies about how we get involved locally, what would each of you say, starting with Tia, as like the first 3 things they should do?
I would say research. I would say look at what is already happening and existing. And then secondly, how can you support and help and assist and raise that to the potential it could be? And then thirdly, if it doesn't exist, who can you pull in from that community to make that initiative happen? So those would be my 3 main things.
Brilliant. Thank you for that. And Jay, what would your top 3 be if you're advising someone from a big international company who wants to make something happen? What should they do? What's important?
So top of the list for me would be relationship. It should never be seen as a transactional, you know, we show up, we do the thing, and then you never hear from us again. You know, so many communities, you know, are used to people doing that. So sometimes there can be a lot of sort of, you know, sharpening your, you know, you've got some ambitious idea for a program or event or something, and it's met with skepticism and reluctance, is because they've had people go in and promise the world and do things, and it's been really extractive, and it's been a photo op, and they leverage everything out of it. You know, they throw some money at it, and you never hear from them again. You know, relationships and investing that can take time, and sometimes that can be inconvenient people if they're trying to, you know, they're focused on KPIs or outputs or whatever it is, but that it is so critical to show that, you know, if you're talking about serving the community, you're really conscious about what that means. A second, what Tia says about doing your research, understanding who are you looking to engage with, and why do you think it's going to be important to them, and ensuring that you're not trying to replicate something that already exists and just adding more noise to the mix. So being really strategic and intentional, what it is you're doing is actually going to help bridge a gap with something that is responsive to their needs where they are. So yeah, again, relationship research is, as Tia said, and working alongside those to be really clear that you're adding value and not just something else, another cog in the machine.
Right, it makes sense. And Jay, you used the term investment there. So I know coming from someone in the industry, a lot of what we get involved in tends to be events. So like with unfortunately Matt, who couldn't join us, involved in making the event happen of KCD in Sydney and getting a community around that. That events are an easy focal point. We're saying if we're going to engage in the community over a long course of time, if we want to build up knowledge of our brand or engagement or offer something back to a community, it's not so much an event model that's successful, but an investment one.
Yeah, I mean, events can still be a part of that. I mean, you know, some of the communities that we engage with, and I said because we built that relationship over time, we've run several events in the same sorts of spaces with, you know, the same or similar sorts of people, because, you know, they understand, or you both understand what each other is about and what's important and what, you know, you can bring to the table. So there, you've established that reciprocity there that sort of works. So, you know, events are really important sort of touch points to, you know, I mean, obviously they're you know, they have profile, they you know, it brings a lot of people together to one space at once, but it's all those things, you know, post and pre the event as well, that is really important to, you know, to continue to ensure that what you're doing is needed for that time. I mean, Tia with and her team with STEM Fest, they've always looked to sort of evolve and adapt. I mean, it's the biggest in the regional country. Tia,
absolutely.
It's the only
huge,
event of its kind in New Zealand. So
that's
you
phenomenal.
know,
So
but
Jay, you're saying that the
Yeah.
events to be successful need that relationship work. And yeah, in your experience, you're saying that STEMfest worked really well because you did the research and knew the people before even launching your very first event. Do you find that now you have some success behind you, those relationships still need to be nurtured and invested in over time, or do the events become self-sustaining?
So the answer to that is that the lazy approach would be it could just rinse and repeat, but that's not what we want to do. So we're quite ambitious in our intent for STEMfest. So, and we shared that from the very beginning when we approached sponsors and partners and corporate. So we wanted them along on the journey with us. So we were very intentional in terms of, you know, this is what we want to do, and this is our vision and our goal. And our vision and our goal is to make STEMfest the field days of STEM. So if you're in the Southern Hemisphere, you know what field days is. And so what we want to do is actually build STEMfest to be that model. And so when you give people that shared vision, they come along with you. And you know, we've been very fortunate that we have sponsors, and we call them partners now, because they really are that. You know, it's not just a case of please give us some money each year, turn up on the day and do something awesome. It's actually having conversations about them. Okay, what worked well, what didn't work well? What would you like to do differently next year? What can we do differently to help grow this event? And we all benefit from the fact that STEMfest will grow year on year in terms of content, but also as well as, you know, attendance numbers. And that will obviously benefit our partners and our sponsors in turn. So it's an ongoing, as Jay said, it's all about relationships. It's about building that relationship and keeping it ongoing and working together. And so it's not just a transactional thing. It's actually very much an investment of, you know, that corporate's time and their effort and their team's effort versus, you know, working with us to ensure that we all put together something that's pretty incredible and amazing for our community.
Brilliant. So I'm hearing it's like a both model. You need the relationships for the event to be successful, and the events will bring everyone together, and you reinvest that success into relationships for the next time the event's happening. So that's a model that works best. If you're going to engage community, you've got to do the foundational relationship research stuff to be able to have the successful events. This is particularly interesting from my perspective because we've just started doing some local community events around Kubernetes and the sort of tech space I work with. Like, again, Jay coming from ii is a Kubernetes contributing group. They're heavily involved in a lot of the really technical work around conformance specs and actually contributing back to it properly. But in APAC, we haven't had Kubernetes events by and large. Like, we haven't got the big conferences you get in Europe or the US. We're just starting with this. So, yeah, speaking on Matt's behalf, who hasn't made it so far today, who must be having trouble connecting to us. We only just had Kubernetes Community Days start last year in Sydney, Australia, and that really took off really successfully. We're still working on one for New Zealand. There's a couple of events starting up, but what we're seeing in terms of the corporate space is there's not a whole lot of spaces to actually talk about success or find people who have the skills that you want to be able to hire. And so for those of us who are in roles or in businesses where we're looking around and we're having trouble identifying customers or identifying potential future hires because our products are based on highly technical stacks that are really prevalent in the US, but people don't talk about much over here. And we're looking to try and start events or get involved in events. What we're hearing from Jay and Tia really loud is that you need to, ideally, you know, come along to the event the first year, but if you want to get really involved, form those relationships with the people who are actually in the events. See if there's work you can do around it that's maybe more than just turning up with a booth. So particularly if we want to upskill people, and picking on both of your experience here around what this looks like, if you've approached by a big international company, they're like, hey, there's a lack of skill in my particular niche. I'm having trouble finding my particular niche. How do I connect with people in the first place? How do I find those leaders, those influencers? How do I identify the people to figure out what I can do to come into that space and do so in a contributing manner rather than a transactional one? So picking on Tia to begin with, when you came into New Zealand and you didn't have an existing network around STEM and making that happen, how did you find the people?
That's a very good question. I spoke to people who knew people. So I spoke to the connectors within our community. So first of all, identify who those connectors are, and then leverage and make friends with them, and then allow them to make the introductions for the next group of people that you need to reach. So I took an approach when I first came up with the idea, and it was easy because I knew community, so the people who would come to our events and visitors would come. I just knew that because I'd done it before, and I knew that the content that we would have would be amazing. And then it was a case of, okay, so how do we pay for this? You know, who's going to actually pay the dollars and make this happen? And the obvious choice was funding or education or corporate. And Tradition New Zealand, I think, speaking to lots of other event organizers in this space, they've always traditionally gone through the university route, the education, because that was obvious, right? We need young people to get into studies and then they start their careers. So that first step was the education. And so I could have gone down that route, but I actually chose to skip education and go straight to industry first. So my reasoning behind that was, if I can get the people who are struggling to find a talent really engaged and passionate, then the universities will automatically come on board. That was a no-brainer. So I just went straight to the top. So I reached, the big companies like the Beckers, the Convitas, the Zesprys, and I knocked on their door, literally, and I said, talk to me, please. I want to tell you about this and how you can be involved and how you can make a contribution to the community. And so a lot of the big corporations, and I suppose the people I spoke to, because again, it's down to relationships and personalities, they understood the long-term investment they needed to make. And so STEMfest is that first initial down payment that you make for that 5 to 8 year old. And then these companies won't see a return for many years. But I had to convince them that that was worth the investment. And so for me, I would say, as a big company looking to do some good and support their pipeline of talent, it's actually thinking a little bit differently and not thinking about the obvious. How else can they support that pipeline? At what point can they plug in financially, or with time, or with influence? So I suppose that would be how I approached it when I came to STEMfest.
Well, that makes good sense. So, speaking from the corporate perspective, if we find other corporates who are having the same problem space in the same part of the world, we'll hopefully, through that, find people who are solving it already. And if we can partner with them, we can make the solution happen faster.
Absolutely.
That seems to make a lot of sense. I mean, no, other than corporate, speaking to corporates is always actually quite a fun conversation. So if you have adjacent companies who are working in the same space but not your direct competitors, that's an easy conversation to have. So speaking for Octopus, for CodeFresh, for Kubernetes, we could partner with or talk to people who also need their customers to use Kubernetes and find out what's developed in different parts of the world. And thankfully, that's a really easy segue into what Jay's doing with ii, because they're trying to share Kubernetes knowledge. Jay, if you were again trying to make a strategy around how to upskill people in Kubernetes or DevOps or these technical roles in APAC where we know there's a deficit, what would your approach be? What would happen if you were able to pull together a bunch of corporates or put on a whole new way of doing things?
Okay. Yeah, so I mean, there's a few things there. I mean, okay, I guess from the corporate perspective, I think one thing is to be good to acknowledge that a lot of the typical sort of ways in terms of how to identify and recruit and develop talent, it's not working. You know what I mean? This is talent shortages, skill shortages are an issue globally. And it's because it's sort of saying typically it's, they want to, they're not sort of engaging until the latter years of a student's, schooling, or they're only focusing on tertiary education environments and saying, that's where we get, the best of the best. But it's not the case. I mean, as we're sort of saying, a lot of, the greatest talents in the space are self-taught. And what is also a really prevalent issue is a lot of the tertiary providers, they can't ensure that their curriculum is current enough to keep up with the rapidity that technology continues to evolve. By the time they acknowledge that there's those sorts of gaps, and they implement that into their curriculum, the game's already changed. So it's it needs to get a little bit more creative about how they do that. And you know, one of the things, you know, we've tried to present Kubernetes, for instance, as a concept, as an idea, in a whole bunch of different ways, right down to, I mean, you might be familiar with the Fippy books and all that sort of stuff. We've tried to contextualize some of that sort of stuff for rangatahi or Māori youth and things, in terms of ways that, you know, characters and concepts that are a little less jargon heavy, and a little bit more identifiable, right up to even how we sort of structure, you know, perhaps some of the delivery. So one of the things that we've sort of drafted is for instance, not a boot camp, but I guess a similar to a sort of boot camp type program that can help introduce to concepts of Kubernetes. For instance, a lot of the content might be covered in a KCNA exam, for instance, but also providing a lot sort of wider context about, you know, besides just, or in addition to just the technical skill set itself, what is the climate of tech? What is the viability of careers in those sorts of opportunities for someone who's considering to, you know, invest their time and their futures potentially in one of these sorts of areas? What are the sorts of considerations with, you know, again, the individual that you're engaging with? You know, what their strengths, interests, passions, contributions that they want to make to the world, and will this potential pathway align with those sorts of things? Because then you're not trying to fit people into a career or, you know, or a skill set in this sort of instance. You're showing that this skill set can help to enhance who they are or what they might want to do with that. You know,
Absolutely. I
there's a
mean,
lot I
certainly
don't
for
understand.
so for
Sorry.
a lot of us, we don't pick up the Kubernetes skills or the tech skills because they innately fascinate us. We do it with a bigger goal in mind. We want to build something or create something or enhance either our collective lives by, you know, being the next startup founder who may build something amazing, or individual lives by being able to, you know, buy a house in younger generations. So Jay, you're saying it's important when we're engaging people individually that we sell them on why they should pick up these skills. And
Yeah,
Tia, you said
the
about it's
why
important.
versus the what.
Yeah, that we sell them on STEM even before they're 8 years old. And I mean, we're seeing here in APAC the pain early where we've got skill deficit in a major way around these high-end skills. But it sounds like the investment or the solution, um, we've got to approach it across age ranges, at least from 8 years on up. So if that's
Yeah,
if that's
potentially
our
younger.
pathway, how do we get people who are ready, you know, maybe they're university age or just finished high school and they're ready to start learning technical topics? And Jay saying the universities maybe are having trouble on that cutting edge. What would it look like if we're
Yeah,
going to invest in a talent pipeline as a community to be able to let these cloud transformation, these tech projects, and this cutting edge stuff actually expand globally and be of use around the world? How do we grow those skills when it comes time to? And again, this is probably a question that I wanted to throw at Matt, but Jay, you're the closest who's involved in this part of the community. How do we get people who are interested, who have a little bit of experience as engineers, who pick up hard skills like Kubernetes? How do we support our tech collective in upskilling themselves?
yeah. I mean, one of the ways that we've found successful that we'd love to sort of grow more is showing these sorts of skills in application, because, you know, it could be so theoretical, you know, so complex in the level of detail. You know, you know, and because a lot of, you know, young people in general, their attention spans are getting shorter and shorter, and they, you know, they want to see what's going to be, you know, the return on their attention and things like that. You know, what's something that you can show that's practical where they can get involved? You know, again, as Tia sort of said, give them an opportunity to break something and put it back together. So could you take the absolute, you know, at least it's something that you can show with Kubernetes. Perhaps it's a, you know, workshop over, you know, 2 hours or half a day or something like that, you know. Feed them, but, you know, show how it can actually have some real world application, and, you know, then sort of how that could potentially scale onto the next sort of, you know, progression of cool, you found that easy, or that was too easy, or that was too hard. Cool, we can adapt what that sort of looks like. Show, can I have that some real world application? You know, a lot of gaps in education in general is sort of teaching all these sorts of skills, and they can't sort of point to what sort of opportunities or value that adds out in the community. So, you know, a lot of those sorts of things, versus what might be dictated by a really sort of, set structured program or course or anything like that. To be adaptive, again, to consider people's individual learning styles, whether it's more visual, where it's more kinesthetic, where it is more, text heavy or what have you. It's, there's a lot of different ways that you can put those sorts of engagement opportunities in front of them and have a lot of those experts or others who are prepared to offer and contribute their time to help, grow that curiosity and capability.
Right, well, that's encouraging. So I'm hearing that we can do small blocks of work that are practically focused and share that information around, and that's really engaging and helpful as opposed to, taking on the burden of 3-year education process or internship. So just, again, plugging a little bit about CodeFresh did here. We were heavily involved in this idea of changing how deployments work. We realized that our customers had a lot of the same questions. We have made 2 micro certifications around this. And I think originally the plan was we're just going to share them with our customers. But it became its whole runaway success in the wider community, and the CodeFresh certifications have really taken off. They take, 2-3 days to do. But again, it's practical projects. And what I'm hearing that aligns really well with that, like, anecdotal knowledge, is Jay, you're saying that practical projects that show an outcome and are engaging for adults and teenagers as well. And Tia, that engaging children in STEM, you got to let them break things and do stuff and see the results straight away.
Absolutely.
So
I would
there's like
add,
a theme here.
sorry. Mhm. I would
So-
add to that in that, as Jay said, you have to make it relevant and applicable to that individual. So whether it be creating a piece of code or creating a game, how can we frame it or ask that question to say, okay, what is the challenge or the problem that you want to solve? And then how can you use what you're learning to create a solution? So
that makes
it's
a lot of sense.
making it really personal. It could be that I need to solve a problem that I keep missing the bus every day because I'm not keeping up with my time. I'm not very good at that. Okay, so can we work on a project that will help you and allow you to catch the bus every day? So break it into small bite size and setting people up for success, especially young people, will really help keep them consistently engaged and wanting to learn more, because once they've had one success, they'll see how easy it is and they'll want to progress to the next stage. And hopefully that encourages them with that whole lifelong learning process, because as Jay said, technology just change day on day. What you know today will be out of date tomorrow. So you have to have that sense of constantly being curious and constantly wanting to learn. And I would add into that mix what a big sort of role models can also bring to the party as well. To be able to see someone like you doing a job that you might like to do in the future is so important. And so being able to connect with that person, have a conversation with them and learn from them, and that it's such a big piece of that whole engagement picture as well. So role models. So, you asked me, what can corporates do to help with community engagement? I would say allow your teams and your staff to go out into the community, to reach out, to get right in with amongst the young people, the parents, the teachers, and actually have those really important conversations. This is my journey. This is where I started. This is where I am. This is where I'd like to be. So that there'll be some young people sitting in that audience going, oh, wow, they're just like me. And, they have the same struggles or they have the same issues, but this is where they are. And maybe one day I too can be like them. So having that role model person in front of you and approachable and accessible is really important too. So that's another thing that corporates can do, not just give money, but actually give time and knowledge back to the community.
Brilliant, thank you for that. So what I'm hearing so far is there's at least 3 different areas that corporates can contribute in. Aside from straight up sponsorship, which again, if you don't partner with people, you don't know the local market, may not give you very good return. But that small practical projects. I know a lot of us just write our documentation around features. If we could write small practical projects that we do with our tools, or if we again grow that to small certification courses and show people know how to use our tools or technologies that we work with, that small piece of practical work is really engaging to help grow the collective talent pipeline and help show people the worth in what we're doing. As Tia said, getting our highly skilled engineers out from in front of their desks and throw them on a video, let them talk about how to do a project, send them to a local high school, use them as part of the marketing around what the technologies you do actually function, what they're used for, what the practical impact is. For those of us in the corporate world, this sort of practical demonstration of what we do is really valuable. You can probably get your marketing team to help with this. But as Tia's saying, the important part is not so much to do it in a really polished, wonderful way, but do it with people who are doing the work, who show young people or show other people in the field that they're able to achieve that level of technical skill. They're able to achieve that level of success. So it sounds like community engagement, do the research, meet the people. If you're going to bring along something to offer, offer your people, offer small practical projects. And that the people in the projects are just as maybe more important than the chance of funding. Because if we're going to engage people in the industry and in what we do and in the tooling, we can start and we should start engaging them in high school with the technologies that we're using. So later on, they can be our customers or be our employees or be our colleagues. Because if we don't get to them, as Tia said, before they're 8 years old, if they don't know these technologies exist, as Jay's saying, when they're in high school choosing careers, they're not going to be aware of our whole industry. And talking as a corporates here, if we want to grow our talent pipeline, it's the same as growing our customers in future. People need to be aware of what we're using and what we're solving. If they're going to be aware of it, one of the easiest ways to make that awareness happen is send out our engineers with small practical projects to connect with the local communities that they're part of and figure out where we can contribute back to the community in a way where we engage with what's really happening. I know if we find people like Tia, who is an amazing example of how to make stuff happen, we don't need to have a Tia in our company. We need to contribute to what Tia's doing. If we find organizations like Jay's, we've got a bunch of amazing engineers who are trying to upskill. We don't need to train our engineers on how to talk to high schoolers. Someone probably already is. But they could do with the backing of helping out with technical resources, helping out with time, helping out with making their reach wider, enable them to do more. So what we do have as corporates is the ability to amplify what people are already doing in the communities. And if we can contribute with what we have in our tooling and our engineers, we are investing in the future potential market for our hiring, for our products, for the industry overall. We've just got the 5-minute warning to wrap up. So I was asked Tia and Jay, if you were to say one last summary of what you've learned that is most useful for people in the tech space or the big companies to hear, what would it be? Starting with Tia.
I suppose my message would be when we are engaging and talking to young people, it's so important that we give them the message that they can be the creator and not just the user. So when they're using a piece of technology, yes, isn't it awesome? But actually, did you know that you could actually create this and something better yourself? So yes, use it. Yes, enjoy it, but think bigger. So I would encourage people to relay that message when they are communicating with young people, that it's about being creating and not just using.
Brilliant. I love that. We certainly will benefit from more young people not just using technology, but realizing that they can break it, remake it, and create with it. And Jay, if you had one last parting thought to summarize all that we can give guidance to corporates who want to get involved in the community or why they should, it would be?
Cool. First of all, tautoko or support quickly what Tia said, 100%. I think for corporates wanting to engage with the community, it's and I guess anyone wanting to engage with the community, it's not about us, you know, ultimately like just about us and what we want and our expectations of something. We should be going in there with, you know, humility and respect and seeking to understand, you know, their needs, and again working towards a reciprocal relationship. So it's yeah, just being really mindful that whoever we're engaging with, it's so important to listen and be responsive to those needs, to those opportunities, to those aspirations that each group, each community, each individual may have, and see how we can work together to respond accordingly. And if said it might take some more time in the short, you know, in the sort of initial sort of stages, but the strength of that will, you know, carry for months, years, and, you know, into the future. Like it's speaks volumes more than someone who's going there with a clip the ticket transactional approach. I really think it's the only way forward.
Right, that makes a lot of sense. So again, the idea that we are investing in communities, because it is important to do unless we want our talent pipeline to dry up. And we're investing in a way that's respectful and appropriate, and we've listened to make sure that we're engaging in the way that works for that community is really important. That being said, I think we're nearly out of time. So thank you very much, Tia and Jay, for joining us. For those in the audience, you will find us, and you probably have found it, on YouTube. Do leave questions in the comments, do connect with us. I can get questions off to Tia and Jay in the future if you want to connect with them or learn more about what they're doing. If you want to engage in how community should work more, I'm sure they're happy to carry the conversation on. Yeah, other than that, we will, of course, hopefully see you all in 2 weeks for the next version to main about internal development platforms and how you actually productize and sell those to the company. How you can take some of the process of getting engineers to use them a little bit easier. And there's other events for both Octopus and for CodeFresh that you can find on their websites. Please do. And if you want to, again, connect more of what Stanfest is doing or what II is doing, both Tia and Jay are very findable on LinkedIn and contactable through comments on YouTube. So thank you all for coming. Appreciate all your time. And we'll leave it at that.
Kia ora. Thank you. Thanks, Paul. Thanks,
Much.
Jay.
Kia ora.
Bye.
Thank you very much. See you later.
Bye. Okay.